That's horrible.
Okay, thank you all for joining us for our first program for Learning and Community Engagement event after spring break. Apparently the semester keeps going on after spring break, which is horrifying in some ways. But we are very, very excited to be welcoming our guest speaker tonight. This is Dr. Jill DeTemple. So enthusiastic that I've ever been greeted ever in my entire life. Dr. DeTemple is joining us from Southern Methodist University, where she's a professor of religion and chair of the Religious Studies Department. She received her PhD from the University of North Carolina, who some of you may have known for having beaten Baylor just recently in the NCAA tournament. Sorry. And told me as we drove over that she is owner of 25 head of cattle. So that is proper Texas.
I like that.
So, with no further ado, I will get out of the way and let Dr. DeTemple present. It's sort of like a plant, why and how religion belongs in academic settings. Yeah.
All right, thank you all. I am so excited to be here. And thanks to you for inviting me.
Yeah, no,
this is
thank you.
fantastic. So here's what I'd like to do tonight. Introduce the study of religion as an academic discipline, because my guess is for most of you, this isn't a thing, right? Most places don't teach it, which may make you wonder about my career choices having gone into it. I'm one of the lucky ones that ever gets to do this. So I'll take a little time to talk about how it landed in universities, even public ones. Actually, the University of Texas has a really good religion department. And then talk about how people like me study it, so you can get some sort of idea about what this might look like. Why I think it belongs in universities, because this is getting to the bigger point, which is how I think we should teach religion so that folks like you and your parents and your weird cousins and the people you meet in the grocery store can actually have conversations about religion. Did any one of you grow up in a house where you were told never to talk about it in public? No? Are you comfortable talking about it? Do you walk up to people and talk about religion? No. No. Okay. Yeah. Because I do think we're sort of socialized to just let people do what they do, and we don't know how to talk about it. And right now, I think it's one of the things not talking about is starting to rip our country apart. You might have noticed that life's a little sketchy out there. People are disagreeing about important things, and religion is one of those. So my promise to you is by the end of the night, you're going to try and practice talking about it a little bit. I'm going to have you do a few skills we do in my classes so that you might be able to feel a little more comfortable that way. Matter of fact, that's how we're going to start. So here's what I need you to do. You need to make 2 rows facing each other if you're with me in the room. If you're on Zoom, I'm going to have you all in breakout rooms of 2. If Dr. Cantrell can make this for you. You do. Everybody in the room, you guys.
You already got 2
Make
rows.
2 rows.
You know, there, I don't know, talking about that. Some of us come from really evangelical households,
Yeah.
and like, that's all you ever talk about.
Right? You probably are choosing one and a half.
It's going to be like
Sorry, yeah. Well, you have to rotate that. Well, start there and then move on. It's fine. Doing. This is something called academic speed dating. And here's how this works. Is everybody looking at one person? You have one partner?
Dr. DeTemple, I'm going to go ahead and create the breakout rooms after you provide instructions, because otherwise you'll have to hop in the breakout rooms.
People in breakout rooms, I'm going to be sending a question on the message, so I'll have to look for the question they're answering. It'll come to them as a message on the screen. Okay. Because here's how this works. Right, and also folks who are in the breakout rooms, you're not going to get to rotate, you're just going to have to hang out with each other. And you all are going to rotate. A question will come up on the screen, or if you're in Zoom land, it'll come up on the Zoom screen, that little message thing. Right. People who are closest to me are going to answer the question first. So if your back is turned to me, it'll be your turn to answer that question, and you're going to have about 30 to 40, you'll have 30 seconds. Actually, I do know how long this is. You'll have 30 seconds to just answer, just talk. Person who's facing me currently, you're just going to listen. You will hear this sound. That's your signal that you're going to change your role. So people facing me will start answering the question. And when you're done, you'll hear that sound again, and I'm gonna ask you to rotate so you're facing somebody else. People in Zoom, you're just gonna sort of time yourself for 30 seconds, have the other person talk, and then wait for the next question. So is everybody clear about what this is? Okay, welcome to academic speed dating.
Tell me, Mark, which.
There's your first question that you can't see because we're in breakout rooms. Hang on.
I'll live black and white.
Yeah, that works. Okay, the question is this, is email the same all over the world?
Alright,
What was it again?
we're getting there.
We're getting there. Mama. Is email the same all over the world?
Oh.
Hey, you go first.
No, just because people are different.
I feel like
There's a lot of same types of people, but it's not the same version.
Oh, yeah, but you question you went.
No, in here, it should be a different
We gotta rotate.
Yeah, so just.
So now everybody needs to be looking at somebody new.
Alright, looking at someone new. I'm just rotating there. Let's see.
Fuck this.
Just here to catch
Talk to her.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just come down this way. Yeah. And I guess.
Well, I'll talk to her.
Okay.
No, they have a person. I'm gonna come here.
Really, this is like that does not rest on the
Can it be margarita?
Too small. Sorry.
Here we go, your next question, you're back to facing me, you're answering.
Too small. Because I already talked to you.
Oh, yeah, right.
Same question.
Wait.
Okay.
Alright.
So is your belief that you have money in the bank and not the same?
Can I get a new question?
This question.
I think I go first, or don't you?
Sure.
Okay. Sure, I can monthly for the bank. Okay.
Can we see it again? No.
I mean, if you got more money than me, you have less like. You're
Like, the concept of what scientific
Okay. So.
You can.
I go first.
So like being somebody who sacrificed. Spiritual savings. I'm guessing
it. And then I like select people. I think that there's like a information not just one or more like valid. Yeah, but I would say that money is just
I like it.
levels two.
All right, rotate. You're in the room.
I think I took a shot.
Let's do this again.
That would make this conversation. I'm too tall for Wait, am I not moving? Oh, nice.
All the way down.
Okay,
I'm older
here's
than
your
that.
next question. Is cake an American ritual object?
Yes.
Go.
Yeah, like do cake like. This is your question. Is it like, you know, taking the sacrament, you know, some people do every year. Like, ritual, someone's object, like theirs. Like, Thanksgiving. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, but that's like a silver. It's not like it's I think and what they used to do for cake, like that they did by dancing. And so in that sense, yeah, I think that way ritual object. You like the way you hold myself. At least she said, like, you know, like change. You know, like
That's it. Have a seat again.
Thank you. Interesting. Oh, ready to get it started. You ain't gotta talk about margaritas, mama.
Everybody to come back.
That was technically.
What are you waiting on her for?
She's not.
So the question of how.
I don't believe in anything anymore.
You over to talk about it. No, we're still waiting on the breakout.
Coming back.
Does this mean we're getting cake?
What's that?
Are we getting cake?
It's a metaphor. Metaphor cake. So you can have whatever kind of.
Can a metaphor be a ritual?
I love that you put that back. It's Salvadorian. That makes me feel
That's a new idea.
foreign money.
You all in the room, sometimes I also ask, did your cell phone set you free? We're not gonna do that one tonight. Okay. I think we got everybody back. We'll keep going here. Those are questions, you just did an exercise I do at the beginning of a world religions class that I teach. Okay? It's an introductory class, it's at our lowest level at SMU. And what they're designed to do is open up ways of thinking about religion that may not be natural or native to you. You're probably not used to thinking about cake and bank accounts, right? In that context of religion, right? Evil may be a little bit more, right? That seems to come naturally for most folks, right? But they get at what I'm trying to do in that class. Like if you all were sitting in one of the rooms that I had at SMU, right? Which is this, to complexify religion as a human endeavor that has real effects in the world. Because how you think about evil, and probably actually how you think about cake, right, and other things, will impact your behavior. You do weird things, and a lot of those weird things happen to be religious. Questions like that get my students wondering if singing happy birthday is actually some kind of religious ritual and we just don't maybe recognize it that way. Okay? The question about cell phone setting you free is related to a lot of religions that want to set you free from something. Maybe your sin, maybe from reincarnation, maybe from suffering. Religions use that language. But it seeps into other places in life, and that's sort of what I want you to start thinking about, is what that might look like in settings like this one. How does that work? Because most of us, I think, believe we should study volcanoes and earthquakes and cancer cells or economic cycles. Like, what's your major?
Oh, I work here.
You work here. What's your major?
Communications.
Communications, right? Yeah, how about for you? What did or do you study?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm computer science.
Computer science, right? Communications, computer science, those things people tend to think of as sort of university degrees, right? They kind of belong here, right? But religion doesn't as naturally fit in, which is why less places teach it. I'll start telling you about why I think they should, right? Knowing about religion, right, lets us predict and react to the world we live in. It's one thing I want students to start being able to do. Daniel Dennett is a philosopher who frankly doesn't like religion very much. He thinks we should study religion for a similar reason. He thinks it's dangerous. The guy really doesn't like religion, right? You can think of religious extremism that can lead to crusades and suicide bombings and long histories of gender and racialized oppression, amongst other things. He has a very long list. You can check him out. I am more optimistic than Dennett and want to credit religion with the invention of hospitals and orphanages. Those are religious institutions, animal sanctuaries, and the civil rights movement. I think if we're going to look at religion, you don't just look at the dangerous side, you also look at what it influences people to do that has changed the world in some really positive ways. So religion, and I'll get to what I mean by that in a minute, does all of this, is to me actually fascinating. That's why I'm here today. I've made a career out of this. I got fascinated in a course on evil my sophomore year of college. If somebody offered a course on evil, you had to take it, right? I also think it's important, right? And it puts it up there with the volcanoes and amoebas and interest rates of our world. No one seems confused when we have an academic department devoted to those things. But what's different, and why might this be a little more controversial? Because religion, I think most of you would say, isn't exactly the same as volcanoes or amoebas or interest rates. It doesn't seem to be empirical or measurable in those ways. How do we measure religion? How would you even go about this? Most religions have some kind of invisible actor involved. If it's invisible, can we really sciencify it in some way or another? Could we measure scientifically bodily resurrection after death? Could we prove a virgin birth or reincarnation? Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins says that these claims are actually counterfactual. Therefore, religion does not belong in a modern university, or indeed in modern thinking. Dawkins is another one who would like to see religion just go away. But what Dawkins gets wrong here is what we mean by religion, or religious studies, as my department is called. Precisely no one in my department tries to prove that Jesus came back from the dead, that the Buddha really saw his previous lives in detail, or the Muslim versions of the afterlife are factual. We do study how people came to believe those things, what effects those beliefs have in the world, how they might have something in common, and just every once in a while, what they might predict. We don't entirely want to give up that predictive stance, where the scientists say that they have all the power. But I'm actually ahead of history here. How is it I can ask you to think about cake, or your cell phones, or money, or sacrifice? How do we think of Zen Buddhist ideas and emptiness as related, somehow, to something like Christian baptism? Why are we sticking all of those things in the same categorical box? I'm going to back up a bit and give you a little bit of the history there, because it's actually a little bit interesting. Because there's a long history of religion in the academy, but a very short history of religion as an academic subject. I am certainly on the cutting edge of this stuff, as you'll come to understand. Not because I'm so smart and academically, but because I happen to have been born into a generation where for the first time ever I could study religion in the University of Connect. So scholar J.Z. Smith put it, and please forgive the gendered language, he's a guy of his time. Man has had entire generations in which to imagine deities and the mode of interaction with them. But man, and more precisely Western man, has had only the last few centuries in which to imagine religion. There is no data for religion. Religion is solely the creation of the scholar's study. What Smith means by this is that religious ideas and traditions, ideas about gods and what they require, ideas about rituals and afterlife and moralities, religious traditions such as Catholicism or Buddhism or Islam, have existed in human history for a very long time. There is data pertaining to each of those things. We have data for Catholicism, Buddhism, Islam. What is newer is the idea of religion as a category that would allow us, and us here being scholars working in the academy, to analyze those things. When Smith says religion is the creation of the scholar's study, he doesn't mean that religion is false or made up. That's not what he's saying here. It takes a little bit of bending your mind around this kind of quotation to realize what he really means. What he's saying is that the category of religion is doing work as a category. It's lumping things together and inviting some kinds of analysis while it disinvites other kinds of analysis. That's what categories do for us. We don't necessarily think of cats as related to trees, okay? Because cats are animals and trees are plants. So you're actually disinvited, even when some things might be similar. Maybe your cat has a pattern on it that looks a little like the bark of a tree. You're disinvited from thinking of that comparison because of the categories we put them in. So, as I tell my students, what Smith is saying here is that religion, the category, is like plants. That's the title of this talk. Religion is like a plant, right? You've never actually seen a plant. No such thing exists. You have seen roses and palm trees and grass. Together, those things are lumped into that category of plant. What religion does, right, is put those things we're considering religion together into a category. And this is actually funky and new in human history. Prior to the Enlightenment, in the 18th century, there was plenty of religion in universities, right? But it wasn't a broad category. And some of you might know that Harvard and Yale were founded as divinity schools designed to train clergy to serve the American colonies. They were modeled on European institutions. You might have heard of Oxford or Cambridge, right? Those places, right? Which got their start in the Middle Ages, that had religious training of that kind as the reason for existence. All universities were essentially divinity schools, right? Training clergy and religious orders in the ways that they believed God interacts with the world. That's what they were doing. And it's all that they were doing for 400 years, for most of them, roughly speaking, right? And it was that way until empirical science started edging its way in towards the end of the 17th century. That kind of empiricism, that kind of scientific study where you want to measure everything, right? In combination with the Protestant Reformation, starting in the 16th century, right? And also colonization, right? Colonial encounters that presented Europeans with a new diversity of ideas and practices that seemed to look a little bit like the Christianity, Judaism, and Islam they knew, invited a new thinking about religion as a category that then attracted academic attention. Some of it, honestly, was very colonial. People needed to know about Zulu rights so they could better control Zulu people. Some of it was flat out curiosity as well. If you look at early colonial records, they were trying to figure out how these folks they were meeting might map onto biblical stories. Looks like they're doing some things that were kind of religious-y. They have stories about a flood. They must be a lost tribe of Israel. Oh, look, we found them. That kind of thinking. So to put it another way, by the end of the 19th century, scholars not only went to university to teach and study their own religion, focused mostly again on what their God wanted for people in the world, but to teach and study about religion as a part of human cultures and understandings. This is when the category of religion, as Smith talks about it, begins to form. It's when we begin to figure out or talk about Christian baptism, Buddhist meditation, and Zoroastrian fire rituals as having something in common. Prior to this time, this would not have been obvious to anyone. It would have been like that cat tree I was talking about. But it's also when the substantive questions about how, when, and to whom to teach and study religion began to come up, especially in public life. Scholars began debating the definition of religion. So should atheistic traditions such as Theravada Buddhism be included as a religion? Technically, there's no God there. What people do might indicate otherwise. And honestly, you can still start a fight today with my colleagues about this question. Okay. Are all rituals religious? Think about the cake in American life. How should we think about birthday rituals? How should scholars think about belief, which is emphasized in Protestantism, but not so much in other traditions? I've actually told an upper administrator in my academic setting that Hinduism, for example, 1 billion altars, no altar calls. You never say you believe in anything in Hinduism, you do it. Belief is not a category of thought made of light. In other words, the scholars invented the category. How should we go about deciding what goes in it and what is excluded? Should we think of American football as religious in some ways?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's another way I could start fights all the time in my classrooms, right? Questions like this. That's the pro tip. We're still trying to figure this out. We are not a settled science in religious studies. Sometimes to our detriment, we usually like to think of it as fun and creative. It can make it harder for us to communicate what we do, frankly. But here's the other thing. These questions weren't and aren't limited to academic journals and conferences. In the United States, increasing religious diversity led to divides and questions about the place of religion, especially in public schools, especially K-12. So 2 Supreme Court decisions, Engel versus Vitale in 1962 and Abington Township versus Schempp in 1963 became really crucial as we talk about these things. The Engel decision ruled that compelling students in public school to pray, no matter how non-sectarian the prayer. And here we should point out the prayer that most people were using was what Protestants would consider the Lord's Prayer and what Catholics call the Our Father. And that was considered non-sectarian, so it really couldn't take non-Christians into account. The court decided in Engel that compelling students to pray violated the free exercise clause of the US Constitution. That's the First Amendment. The Schempp decision concurred, but went further and commented on what religion as an academic subject, naming it as proper if, quote, presented objectively as part of a secular program of education. There's other language in that decision that says it is improper to teach religion, but you're more than allowed to teach about religion. So teaching about religion, the justices concluded, was not the same thing as indoctrinating students into a religion. They are separate activities, and indeed they found such teaching vital to a free and informed society. There are comments in that decision where they talk about knowing about religion as the way that we can be civically together. And they especially noticed at that time that the US was diversifying religiously. These decisions came just as public universities were beginning to form departments dedicated to the study of religion in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Prior to 1950, you couldn't study religion at any public university in the United States. It just wasn't available. And as what is now the American Academy of Religion, which is an academic association that has 11,000 members, was breaking away from the Society for Biblical Literature. So the Society for Biblical Literature is there folks who tend to study the Bible and often do so within religious traditions. So they're again asking those questions about how does God want us to be? What is our relationship there? The American Academy of Religion broke off saying we want the scientific study of religion, which would not come from a professional stance. So fast forward, today, some of the best religious studies departments are actually in public universities. University of California at Santa Barbara, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Indiana, and other places have very good departments of religious studies. University of Texas at Austin as well. But the next question then, though, still is why? Why do this? Why spend a lot of time talking about things we can't measure? Because getting legal clearance to teach about religion and knowing why and how to do it are actually different things. Which is why I think there's still actually so few public religion programs and why we still don't teach at K-12. We still aren't really clear about the whole project in a lot of ways. For most students I get at Southern Methodist University, I'm their first ever person to teach them religion outside of Sunday schools or mosques or Hebrew school or whatever they're coming from. So it's the disconnect, I think, between knowing that we can do it, but knowing why or how to do it, that brings me here today. It's why religion isn't as obvious as lemmings or sentence structure or quarks for most university settings. Right? In my mind, it should be, but I want to make the case for you in 3 areas about this stuff. So, the first is this: if you're going to be a culturally competent person, you should be religiously literate. Especially in plural societies like the United States, but also because we live in a global world. Understanding various traditions is vital for educated persons living and interacting in that world. It's the small things, like knowing why your favorite Middle Eastern restaurant might be closed every Friday night, and understanding why it's important to some Protestants to thank God after making a touchdown. To much bigger things like checking media bias against Muslims or not requiring Seventh-day Adventists to do a Saturday shift. That's religious literacy, knowing that stuff. It can also be profitable. As a student of mine learned a few years ago, this kind of literacy can have dividends. So he was working his way through SMU as an EMT, he's an ambulance driver and a medic. Right? And he walked in to drop off some paperwork one day after having taken that intro religious world religions class, that academic exercise you've just done. And he noticed a statue on somebody's desk that reminded him of the Hindu comic books we had looked at. And so he started a conversation with her about, had she ever read the comic books? And what did she think about all of the stuff that we've been looking at? That clerk who was taking the paperwork was so impressed with his cultural competency, she went to her supervisor, who then offered his ambulance company a multi-million-dollar contract in recognition of their cultural skills. He never did fess up that he hadn't learned it from the company. But needless to say, he got a promotion and a raise. And I was delighted when he wrote to tell me that some of the skills he learned in a religion class had benefited him, even before he graduated, actually. So, and of course, understanding anything about local, national, and global politics, I think requires understanding religious moods and motivations. In what ways might the Russian war on Ukraine have some anti-Semitic stuff in it, especially lately? They're recasting the Holocaust as somehow a Ukrainian problem right now. Never mind that Ukraine was ground zero for a lot of nasty anti-Jewish stuff. How should we think about Trump and Jesus t-shirts people were wearing as they crashed the Capitol building barriers January 6th? How has Buddhism aided environmental destruction in Asia? And also global responses to that. And why are so many NGOs working in international context, religion and religious origin? Again, it's both that where might religion not be on such good sides of things, and where might it be on the absolute right side of things? Why are some of those religious NGOs actually a lot more effective than the government organizations trying to do the same work? And how does that work for people on the ground? That's actually my area of research. So that's the first thing. Culture is basic cultural and religious competency, so you can be an engaged citizen in the world doing the work that you do. The second, the skills needed to think and write effectively about religion are skills useful in other academic areas and in life. Along with philosophy, religious studies is a top sending major to law school, and our students perform at high levels on the LSAT. We're very proud of this fact. And many is true, many of our majors go to law school. In that, religious studies is frankly not a career choice for most people. Right? But there's a good reason for this. And to think and write well about religion from an academic perspective requires abilities in analytic thinking, careful reading, empathy, and the ability to master specialized vocabulary and possibly a foreign language or two. And practice in asking good questions. This is something I'm going to come back to later about why I think this stuff is actually really important for us right now. Because the field doesn't share a unified methodology, I am trained, for example, as an anthropologist. My colleagues are trained in textual studies, psychology, and various forms of historical analysis. Students, especially at the undergraduate level, learn to approach subjects and ideas from a variety of different ways with a large and diverse toolkit. Even our minors tell us they use the skills from our classes to go do their other stuff on campus, and they do it better. And third, exploring religion is an important piece of personal development and self-authorship. Whether students come to my classes committed and orthodox in a religious tradition, spiritual but unaffiliated with a religious institution, or none of the above, as some have described themselves, and which is actually the fastest growing religious category in America, as people check that box on the Religious Landscape Survey. They often comment on the value of studying religion for complexifying and clarifying their relationship to religion as a force in the world and in their lives. I'll give you a couple of student quotes that'll then transition us into a couple other things. Here's one student. While my reasoning remains unchanged, I have received new, interesting information with which to reason. The field of study, which previously was a mystery, has now yielded fascinating conversations. This process has encouraged me to remove the sentence, "I don't understand," from my syntax. Instead, I should engage in a more active process of learning. This is going towards that sort of getting people into a place where you can ask a question of somebody, even if you have no idea what they might say in return. Which for most of us is sort of scary. This is a student who used this stuff to kind of get to that place. Somebody else? When I took my first religion class last year, apparently students have taken more than one, we always like it when they come back, I found that it changed who I was quite a bit. I grew and grew, and not at all without growing pains, but in the end, I survived. That was when I was inspired to continue on this journey of being a student of something that has had one of the largest impacts on the world. Religion is more than just an aspect of culture. It is woven into the fabric of most of human existence. Even those who refuse religion do so in objection of such, not in its absence. There is no true absence of religion, because even the least spiritual devote themselves to some sort of moral ethic or inspiration. When I look at that kind of thing for my students and other people's students, I see stories of becoming, of people starting to understand, at least in some small and informed way, how they want to be in the world. What is magic for me are the ways the study of religion can support and process, or that particular process for college students. You are at exactly the right stage to do this, which is one reason I absolutely love my job. You have all the right questions, and you're just brave enough to go and try it. I'm not sure you would get things like this from grown-ups as much. Grown-ups tend to be, full-on grown-ups anyway. People my age who remember the 70s, right? Less flexible and open to this kind of transformative thinking because we just aren't as flexible anymore. We're a little more set in our ways usually. Okay. So there's a magic to this. But as any magician will tell you, magic takes work. It's not enough to just throw a bunch of religious bits and bobs on a table and tell people to make something of them, or worse, tell them there's only one correct approach to all of that mess you just made. So how do we go about studying this stuff? What does this look like? And I know this is a question that's been burning in the back of your minds, right? What kinds of things do religious studies scholars actually study? And if there's no data for religion, if it's like a plant that way, what do you actually, where is the data? What do you do? So my home department at SMU is pretty exemplary in this regard. We're actually a very small department. There are 8 of us, give or take. Some of us are experts in traditions. One of my colleagues studies Buddhism in its many forms in East Asia, including its long intersection with Islam, especially on the Silk Road. He's also the guy who's worried about environmental disruption and what Buddhism has done to make China look the way it looks right now. And he's also currently looking at the history of Uyghurs, that Muslim group that's being absolutely brutally oppressed by the Chinese government. We get worried about him often as he goes to China to do this research. We're never quite sure he's coming back. Another one of my colleagues is an expert in historical Judaism, especially as it has influenced the design of religious spaces in North Africa. She looks at architecture and then how those architectural spaces for Christianity, Judaism, and Islam were translated further north up into especially Spain, especially the Jewish diaspora. Another one of my colleagues looks at Islam and its relationship to the West. And 3 of my colleagues are text scholars. One focuses on the Hebrew Bible, one on 14th century Hindu texts. He has decided his job in life is to figure out when a scholar it was a Hindu scholar writing in that long ago time, was speaking sarcastically or not. It's really hard, 700 years later, give or take, to figure out if somebody was being sarcastic as they were writing religious texts. So that's what he does. Another one is taking his skills about the early Christian Bible and is now examining Bible curricula used in public schools in the United States. So something you all may, some of you may have run into some of these in high school if you had a Bible course option. And another one just finished a book on the Santo Daime tradition in Brazil, which is a Christian group that imbibes a hallucinogen as a part of their ritual practice. So we do a lot of different things. I've spent most of my career researching and writing about the intersection of religion and economic development in Ecuador, especially as religiously based programs there often target women. I'm interested in the way that people roll out religion and gender and economic development that way. So if you looked at the program for the American Academy of Religion annual conference, you would add a whole bunch of things to those particular groups I just told you about. There are sessions there on religious influences on hip hop, cognitive theories that argue we are genetically predisposed to be religious, to large-scale sociological surveys that track shifts in religious populations. That's how we know that nuns are an up-and-coming category. So indeed, the approaches and subject matter within the field are so broad, some, including J.Z. Smith, who was quoted about scholar study and all that at the beginning, don't think religious studies should actually be its own discipline. It's too big, too broad, but should instead be an integral part of departments ranging from English to psychology to biology. You should be learning religion, he thinks, much in the way you probably did K-12, which is sort of tacked onto social studies and integrated into things like Shakespeare classes. Another great way to start a fight with people in my own department. Should we even be one, or should historians be locked into history? Should I be over with anthropology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because what Smith argues, and where the folks in my department tend to go, is that it's only in context that we can understand religion at all. How religion affects thinking about things like evolution, for example, in biology. I think there's something to that. But I also think some of the magic I was talking about, and that you might have, in the students you were reading there, those reflections, can only come when religion is centered. And we make it the focus of study. Now you know which side I'm on. I think we need a department because of our ability then to center religion as a thing. Because if religion is only instrumentally approached as a reason for the political revolution or an important subplot to the text, it's really too easy to miss the centrality of religion in people's lives and experiences. Yes, religion affects voting outcomes and health and immigration, but those things also affect religion. It's a two-way street. Simply rolling one into the other will miss important dynamics in the world. Let's move on. Which leads to this question about then how do we teach it? How do we go about this stuff? If you're going to be in a religion classroom, if you're somebody like me who's tasked with teaching people about religion at some sort of functional level, how should we do it? So like the majority Supreme Court in that Chump case I was talking about, my experience has shown me that we can teach about, not teaching, and that this needs to be differentiated from teaching religion, again, within those normative confines of the tradition. And with the majority of the court in that decision, I don't think that not advocating for a particular tradition or even a broadly defined religious point of view establishes what the defendants in that case were worried about. They were worried about a religion of secularity and kind of blank space where the religion had been sucked out of the room, right? And there was nothing in it to replace it, where the de facto stance would be non-religious. I'm not worried about this for this reason. Religion is all around us. It's in our classrooms already. It's here, right now, with us. A lot of you probably come from religious backgrounds, or even if you don't, you know people who have, and you have those conversations. So good teaching about religion harnesses those experiences and links them to methodologies and content to create a kind of classroom that engages students and gets you curious. If I can't get you curious, I cannot teach you. Flat out. So this kind of teaching also instills students with critical skills and dispositions for civic life. I want you curious about religion because I want you to go out and be a good citizen. You will be a better citizen if you can have these conversations and if we practice them in spaces like this one. So, learning to talk about and listen to others' experiences of religion is one brick we sorely need, as so many are crumbling in our civic foundations right now. We are as polarized in the United States as at any time, at least among white Americans, I need to be a little bit more clear, since the Civil War. And it's not getting better. The data we have about polarization in the United States says that as of 2017, you're not only likely to believe that you disagree with somebody, but you are more likely to say that the person on the other side of the issue is out to harm us. It's not a recipe for success, right, in this way. So when I talk about instilling skills in students and talk about inviting the religionists into the room, I want to give you an example of what I mean by this. This will be another participant activity, so be warned. We're right now in something like a classroom space. It is a classroom space. The topic here is religion in the university, right? So rather than presuming you all come from places where there's no religion, or where it doesn't matter to you, I'm going to invite you to lean into your experiences to fill out what might be a kind of blank or overly sterile picture. So here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to take a minute and quietly reflect on this question. Think about a time when you noticed religion on campus, either in a classroom or some other space. What was going on? What did you understand or not understand as you tried to make sense of it? So take a minute and jot down a few notes for me about this.
Also, think of it, I didn't bring it up the right.
Well, think. 60 more seconds. Jamie, can I get you to make breakout rooms of 2? Here's what I'd like you to do. Go find a partner, any partner will do, and take probably 3 or 4 minutes and just share what you were thinking about this.
Okay. Buddy, are you my buddy?
Well, don't talk too sad about it.
Let's talk about it. Well,
What are your ideas?
as long as there's a. There you go. Everybody's got a buddy. All right.
But it is though. Because
Sometimes I think that students.
I remember when Cassie did the news, she was like, you gotta respect each other's experience. Right. So it's just like, it's not, it's important, but that's for the fact that you have to respect each other. Because like, you're Christian.
Yeah.
Or you?
Yeah.
She's Baptist. Oh my, Lisa's another religion, I don't even know. Melanie doesn't even have a religion. Oh no, she's Christian. Like you see, we're all like a mix of different religions. We're like all a mix of different religions, and we respect each other's opinion on religion. Like, I'm not like, oh no, you're Christian. Can't talk. Oh no, you're Baptist. You're Christian Baptist? And it's just like, I just want to just like, it's important to respect each other. I think that's like one thing that I learned.
Less common argument, but it's still also
if they that we put like what is that? But it's like you were Alex. Remember Alex? Do you ever ask about religion?
I never asked about religion, but every time I go to his house, he always talks about it, and we always contradict the beliefs.
You see, it's just like, it's that type of thing, like, where like, you don't really talk about religion stuff. But maybe I'm gonna tell you about that. Like, yeah, maybe the mom of Jesus, Mary, they were. Oh, this is fine. But like, no, but like, it's like, it contradicts me, like, no, she's not. Like, we started arguing over like religion, but then like, it's not, it's just like, we each believe in what we believe. Like they were like talking about it, especially like
If you're not on this, then or you just have to go separate.
This is like that.
All right, we're running out of time. We can call you back in wherever you're at. All right, what came up for you in those conversations? What was that like?
Respecting each other's opinions.
Say more about that, respecting each other's opinions.
Like, as our friend group, we're different, we were raised differently, so we all have different religions. Like, we're like all have a different type, but at the end of the day, we don't talk about our types of religions. Like, we don't bring them up because we know we have different beliefs and different perspectives on that topic. And we don't want like to have like a little argument over it when it's like not really necessary because we all grew up differently.
We don't force our religion onto someone else.
Yeah, so that's a way of inviting religion into the room without maybe risking some of that. Did you feel a little more confident you can talk about it? Yeah. Yeah, how about for somebody else? What came up for you? What was in the room that maybe wasn't before?
Well, we brought up was, just like, for example, when we're creating clubs and stuff like that, if somebody was to come and say, hey, you know, I want to create a club, I want to do a Bible study. There's not gonna be much question about what you're gonna do, or each other, it's like, oh, okay, that you need to find people and you can create a club. But let's say I said, oh, hey, I want to create a club where we learn more about sex education. There's gonna be a lot more questions of what are you doing, how do you want to do this, how do you want this. There's gonna be a lot more questions that if you just show up and say, hey, I'm gonna go.
Yeah, so maybe around here, religion has a certain obviousness, there's some other things maybe don't. Sure. Yeah, and that maybe is why you notice it. Yeah. Yeah. So this kind of thing, I've spent about the last 5 or 6 years working on thinking about ways we can have more conversations like this in classrooms, not just in religion classrooms. I was particularly interested in it because I wanted to bring that religion back into those spaces so the students could connect their own experiences with what I'm trying to teach them. I teach horrible things, my friends. Horrible things. 19th century theories of religion is what I'm tasked to do most of the time. And I can tell you, the vocabulary is terrible. It is not natively interesting to most people. And it would exclude most people's experience with religion de facto. Most of them are atheistic theories of religion. They actually think we should have outgrown it by now. And this is a way of thinking about those theories, but related to your own experiences. So as we've been working on this stuff, now I do a lot of this, we've been wondering about how to have that. And honestly, that asking about experience is the first way. Find a question you can ask somebody. So if you're with the friend group and you don't want this, go to an experience first. Don't ask for the opinion about the policy first. Ask about a time when, because that's what will allow somebody's experience in, and then eventually you can maybe have that conversation about the actual. That's what I love to do with classrooms, right? It's its own form of magic. I don't have time to get into the whole thing of doing with something we call dialogic classrooms around this. I really wanted this though for my graduate students because we send them out to teach religion with no training about how to do it. They're just supposed to magically know how to navigate a room. But the lessons that this work has taught me, I think are applicable to you all as I wrap things up with some ideas about talking about religion, even outside of classrooms. So now that you know how religion might work in the university, I want to spend just the last few minutes here before I open it up to questions from you all about thinking about how to have these conversations right, with your family, with your friends, right, with all of that actual public that you will interact with. So how should we talk about religion? Your curiosity is your superpower. If you can get curious about something, even if you disagree with it, you can interact with it. I forget to tell you this, but believe me when I tell you it's true. Meet resistance with curiosity. If something is sketching you out, we get triggered, your body and brain react the same way to a threat as they do to a physical threat. Your brain is terrible at telling the difference between a bear trying to eat you and somebody who just said that thing that crosses a political or social divide. If you can take a breath and get curious, you cannot shut down and you can have a conversation. It's a great way, right? It's one reason I love being in religious studies is allow me to be curious about things, even if I don't agree with them at all. I get to ask those questions from people and I can get to understand them better. And I find that to be a really fun thing to do, actually. Trust is really essential. You can't have those curious conversations with somebody you really don't trust. And that means you may have to do some work. I don't ask my students to have hard conversations about religion or anything else. We talk about guns in my class. We talk about, well, we did talk about abortion. That one's up on the table now. But they talked about religious exemptions from vaccines the other day. They couldn't do that if they didn't know each other and trust each other. One way you can build trust in a room is to just have an introduction that isn't the normal introduction in a room. Go around and have everybody talk about one thing that brought them joy recently. Instead of just saying, my name is Matilda and I'm a sophomore and I pledge this sorority. If you talk about the things that bring you joy, maybe you have a new puppy. Maybe somebody else has a puppy, and all of a sudden you understand that person has a common interest in you. I do this with adults. People talk about gardening. During COVID, they were talking about baking bread. All these beautiful things that came in the room, and we could connect that way. They were human, and then we could have more difficult conversations. Which is to say, spend that time. Again, ask about a story or experience before you dive into the actual issue about like the clubs or the thing that might cause contention. Because this is true, stories will say more than position or doctrines ever will. If you want to know about somebody's religion, don't ask what the religion says about something. Ask about their experience with it. Tell me a story that would help me understand how it is you came to believe what you believe about. Everybody has a story. Most people actually don't know much about the doctrines in their own tradition or how it came about. Most of us are horribly uneducated about whatever religious tradition we came from. We just do the stuff. But if you ask people to tell a story about a time when they were particularly embedded in their tradition, or a time when they felt like they were actually feeling a little excluded from it, or a time when it was important to them, that's when you're going to get to know about this stuff. Because that's how you get into the productive conversations. Like if I asked you all right now to think about productive conversations, those are probably conversations where you knew you were being listened to. Probably conversations where you were engaged with the person and were listening to them as well. I could also ask you about bad conversations and what happened. Structure those conversations, but you do have to pay attention to those kinds of things. Which is to say, you need to listen comprehensively. This is not the same thing as sort of listening out of one ear while you're on the phone on the other. You need to commit to listening. And you may have to listen to more than you normally listen to. So when you listen to somebody's story, what do you listen to? You go home to your family and your brother's telling you about their day. What are you listening to?
Everything.
Everything. Well, what's everything?
Everything he's saying.
Okay.
His body language.
Yeah. Okay. So you're probably a pretty good listener. I tend to listen to like the details of the story that my husband starts talking. I'm like, okay, you went here and then you went there. And then also part of my brain is like, and this is going to mean what for us? Right? right? But there are other ways we can listen to people.
I listen to everything my wife says all the time,
Liar.
not just because this is being recorded. Take a lesson. Anyway, sorry, go on.
So I won't have you do this exercise tonight, because I won't have time to actually have a discussion about all of this stuff. But there's something we have people do called full spectrum listening, where we have somebody tell a story for 2 minutes, usually about a time they've overcome a challenge. And then we have people listen differently. One person will listen to that story just for the details of what happened. Right? What actions did this person do? Somebody else listens for the emotions in the story. And then somebody else listens for the values that are underneath all of this. That's what we mean by comprehensive listening. Because that means you're really going to understand where somebody's coming from. Another way you can listen, especially if somebody's complaining about something, is to try and listen for the hope that's behind the complaint. We tend to talk about things that aren't right because we want the world to be a different place. I'm complaining that I really, this place is terrible coffee, it's always cold. What I'm hoping for is somebody to make me a warm cup of coffee. If you can listen to complaints that way, you might actually be able to help the person achieve that goal. And that is another way of humanizing conversations, even across vast differences, some of which might be religious. So that is how we can talk about religion. And finally, you're going to have to learn a little bit of resiliency. Sometimes you will hear things that go against that deeply held belief or worldview. And you might have to be resilient, take a deep breath, and encourage yourself to go along, which means sort of knowing why you're listening to somebody. I listen professionally because I go out and ask people really crazy questions about religion and politics and gender. But sometimes I do have to sort of take a breath and keep with it, because eventually they're going to tell me something really important. So, to wrap this back to religion and then invite your questions, I'll stop there. You need to be comfortable knowing that many of the questions religious studies asks don't have answers. For a lot of us, this is thrilling. It's an open frontier. For other folks, this is really frustrating. I had a student years ago who put on my student evaluation, class starts with a stupid question and it never ends. Well, I kept telling them there were no answers to most of this stuff. Again, I find that to be an advantage. I actually think most things don't have the concrete answers we think they have. But you can lean into those questions. Right? It's kind of like those plants. Right? Religions come and go, change and grow in ways that often defy any kind of static definition. And in that, at least for me, is the beauty and the importance and the challenge of this stuff. With that, I will wrap it up and invite questions and curiosity and anything else you got for me.
Thank you. I think we have one right here.
I
Jump in.
How do you address students who come in expecting and hoping for a class that doesn't teach about religion, but just teaches religion?
Yeah, such a relevant question for us. The department's been handling somebody who transferred to us thinking we were a religious institution, and we're not. And took our New Testament class, which is very academic focused. And again, most people don't have training in K-12, so this is actually the majority of our students, I would say. They have no idea what they're signing up for. It either fits into the time slot, or they're looking to work on skills in mission work if they're Christian or something. I think the first thing is actually acknowledging that position. So saying, I hear what you're saying when you say that, and that's true in most places. But here's the thing, we're up to something else that's different here. And so we spend a lot of time actually, especially in classes that will be contentious, because you're going to hear things in there you're not going to hear from your sending congregations about like how the Bible comes together, especially if you're from a more fundamentalist tradition. So that for us, that's a lot of our Muslim students and some of our Christian students. Because we're talking about the time period in which the Gospels were written by people. That's a really different approach. Or when I teach philosophy of religion, it's a really different approach to this stuff. So we do a lot of gentle talking with students about why the space is different. And then we do a lot of practice work about how to think and write about it. I'm never going to give students a paper in the first 5 weeks of the course, because what I'll get back wouldn't look like an academic paper on religion. And for some students, it's easier than others. Some students just leave angry. We do our best, but we can't get everybody sort of moved over, and that means they're not ready for it. Other students find it to be that growing experience, like that student you're saying she survived. I think that would be sort of the end result for a student who's able to sort of be in a couple of places at once, understand the academic study of religion may not always support what a pastor or imam or somebody is telling them, but they can find a way to actually meld them together in significant ways. That is a lot of work.
Other questions? I'll ask. We don't, as you know, have a
Yeah.
religion studies department here. Horrifyingly enough, I may be the closest thing since I'm a historian of religion. So I talk a lot about religion in my classes, and I wonder.
We study cool people. They're like smiting people.
Yeah, literally everyone should take my class. That I think is really the takeaway from this evening. Thank you. No, I would say one thing I've run into, I wonder, it's probably tied to that fact we don't really talk about at K-12, is the fact that for most people, almost all people, religion is essentially a personal thing to them, right? It's an individual thing, but they're also part of this broader community.
Yeah,
And-
yeah, in the United States, that's true. It's less true globally, but yes.
Yeah, it's very true for
Yeah,
here. And so I'm wondering, and maybe it's kind of connected to this question, how do you kind of get students to not necessarily even engage with religion academically, but
Yeah.
engage with it corporately in a way beyond their tradition?
A lot of the sort of dialogic, tell me a story when.
Right.
And I can do that now in these little 2-minute snippets. We have these things called dialogic moments. And I hook them up to lesson plans. They're not just out there randomly, but I asked students one time about a time when religion and science were either working together or not working together for them, and had a couple of them tell those stories. It totally humanized the fact that, so a Buddhist student of mine talked about the day when, his dad had been telling him his entire life that the Buddha would make his hands swell up if he told a lie. Then when he got to be about 7, he told a lie, and he realized his hand hadn't swollen up, and he totally moved over to the rationalistic side of life. Right, so for him, that was the great divide between religion and science. Right? He sort of just moved over. And then somebody else talked about a family experience between a fundamentalist aunt or atheist father over a game called the timeline game. I don't know if any of you have ever played it. You're supposed to place your marker, you just get an event and you're supposed to place your marker on this timeline. The person who's closest to reality wins. That's all fun. Well, it was fun until the dinosaur card came up. And the young earth creationist aunt and the atheist dad were about to have a major confrontation. And she's telling the story, we could all just picture this room. Right? And that's the place, I think, if we can do that kind of work, where, this is personal, right? It's happening in a living room. I mean, my Buddhist student was somewhere in his bedroom, I don't know. But it bridged that divide between the personal and the public for us. We could get into those stories. And then when I had to start teaching Barber's models of religion and science, which is this hugely technocratic thing, we'd actually pretty much done the work because of that. And he was just giving us categories to put things into. I think religion is honestly natively interesting to most people, and they want to talk about it. They just think they don't have the skills. We've trained you up to talk about books since you were in first grade. Yeah.
My question would be, since we don't have any professors of religion, so basically professors from SMU, do you think that your own personal beliefs in a religion, in a specific religion, ever is in when you're actually talking about religion, when you're speaking or when you're talking, when you're teaching, does your own ever get involved? And that's why maybe each professor has a different teaching about the same thing.
Yeah. So we're trained to disassociate. That's another place you really start a fight. How much of your own beliefs you bring into a classroom? And we all have different approaches to it. One of my colleagues talks about his upbringing before he starts teaching, so that if he does have biases, students can identify it. I sort of take the opposite tack. I tell my students, you can come and ask me about my ascending tradition the day before you graduate. And surprisingly, some of them actually do. And I'm careful to actually identify with a number of the traditions. I use lead language with several traditions I teach to kind of muddy the waters a little bit. Yeah, there are a lot of ways to do this. And I don't think there's a right answer. Because of the academic, it's funny, we don't ask biologists the same question. I actually think we should, or political scientists even. Does your own political affiliation influence the way you teach in the classroom? Well, of course it's going to at some point. But I also think we're professionals and we know how to be aware of our own stances enough to back up when we need to, or to lean into it when it's useful as well. And that's the other nice thing about getting a lot of voices into a classroom. Right now I have a class of 42 students. Somebody talked about growing up Zoroastrian, somebody talked about growing up Jehovah's Witness. A couple folks have talked about being Pentecostal. All of those voices are in the room. Well, that's a lot more powerful than just mine. So inviting those sorts of tell me about a time when kind of conversations, I think really helps cut down the potential for just getting one point of view.
Other questions? Going once? Twice.
I've got one.
There it is. Thanks, man.
I have a question. What do you think? I see and I've heard a lot of a struggle between, I guess, a struggle with the issue of separation of church and state.
Mhm.
I think that teaching religion more often in schools and college would help, but what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm all on team religion. No, because I think we don't teach it, right? And half of our population never sets foot in a college. It's a recipe for disaster if you have no idea what your neighbor might do or think or believe. I think it's a lot of what's behind the persistent prejudice against Jews and Muslims in this country. Never mind more minority faith traditions. I mean, some of my Zoroastrian students talking about being Zoroastrian, she starts it by with, I know you all don't know what this is. Right? She grew up in Texas. Right? It's, she just walks around thinking people are in complete ignorance of anything about some of the deepest parts of her experiences in family life. I wish the world was different for her. I mean, she's given up even explaining it to anybody. So I am not going to say that more knowledge is going to lead to world peace. That's obviously not true and hasn't been true. But I do think knowledge about how to talk about religion and some basic stuff would lead at least to potential for a better civic life for us. Perhaps a broader representation of public places for people who really currently are invisible. I'm still an optimist.
Any other questions? In that case, let's go ahead and thank Dr. DeTemple once again. Well done.
Thank you.
The closest thing we have to religion is history, so feel free to take some of those. Now,
I'm sure your English people talk about it too.
yeah.
Probably political science.
Oh, sorry, Harry. Did you actually have a question, Michael? I apologize. You may unmute and ask your question.
Please.
Okay, sorry. Y'all get
No, I wanted to give applause. I just don't know how to do Zoom. Don't worry about it.
All right, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Well,